we are linked to the land and to the earth, and those spirits that can heal us within the plant also exist at a planetary level on Earth. And I think now is vital as we come into this new era, that we need to recognize that the land and the planet itself is able to help us in the same way that a particular plant can from the Amazon, or whether it's from a field near us.
This is the inaugural broadcast from newpsychonaut.com. I am Steve Langsford-Beale, and with me is Mark Leib, who is a geomancer and a biodesigner. Hey, Mark, how are you doing? And thank you very much for joining me this afternoon.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for giving me some time.
So tell me what it is, and tell the listeners as well what you do, and maybe start with a bit of what you did beforehand, because you don't just do this specialist engineering. You were quite an established designer beforehand, in fact. So, I mean, you designed Bougie.
There was a lot. So I did design for 25 years, commercial design. Design restaurants, hotels, nightclubs, all the fun stuff, and houses. In London and in Australia. And about 10 years into that, I had an internal change through doing energy work from the Taoist tradition, a little bit like Kundalini yoga. And that fundamentally changed me. That was a year of internal change, which changed my worldview, changed my understanding of who I was, and sent me on a 15-year journey of finding out how I could develop my design skills and create places that could heal us, as well as be beautiful and aesthetically pleasing, and all the other things that are commercially necessary. And I found that in a unique tradition in Europe, which some of your listeners would know of feng shui, which is the Chinese system of looking at environments. My system is the equivalent that is unique to Europe, and is essentially relatively unknown, and was created to build temples and sacred places, but now we use it for building homes and any sort of space where we want to improve life and wellness.
And is this sacred geometry, which people might have heard of? Correct.
It is. Sacred geometry is, it is. It encompasses that. And sacred geometry is now getting a lot more awareness. It's been a thing for about 40 years. It was sort of reignited by a guy called Jean-Michel in the early 70s, and he looked at a lot of the old knowledge, and in the sort of post-hippie era, the books he wrote became really influential from Glastonbury onwards, and essentially were vital in the instigation of the new age things we know today. And it was the understanding of how archetypal forms, geometry, from Plato and all the different traditions, have been vital in the development of art and design and culture through the ages.
Now, you've actually got a workshop coming up in Glastonbury that people can buy tickets to already. Tell them where they can get tickets.
They can get that from a lovely gentleman who's running that, and his name is Gibby, and Gibby is working for a group called Earthlight, and we'll give his details at the end. It's at the moment it's just an email address.
So it's but it's on May the 8th.
It's on May the 8th,
and it's right at the wellness centre, the retreat.
It's called Soul Sanctuary. It's a temporary space that he puts up through the summer. It's essentially a beautiful field, place called High Ham. It's about 15 minutes from Glastonbury. with stunning views over the Somerset levels. And throughout the summer, he runs ceremonial workshops. I've been asked to create a sacred space for that, and so we've decided to open that up and show people how that actually happens. And on that day, people will also get to learn how to dowse, how to feel energies, how to find good places and bad places in the homes, and get an understanding of the methodology of the tradition, how the techniques have been done in Europe for the last 4,000 years.
So just to recap, May the 8th.
Yep.
Essentially introduction to sacred geometry workshop, where people will eventually, by the end of the day, get to have built their own sacred space. That
they will. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what we're doing is we're actually building a stone circle. So the yurt is circular. It's 10 meters, 10 meters in diameter, and we're building a sacred space, and we're actually building a stone circle, 22 stones around that. And the sacred geometry that I use is quite specialist, and it's created from the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth, and the latitude. There's a lot of math and geometry, so people will get to understand how the geometry is created, how the sacred geometry of that land actually activates frequencies, and how that connects with earth energy. So that's the other aspect to it. Sacred geometry is related to pure geometry and mathematics, and it's also the understanding of how those forms are created at an archetypal level. My tradition is a building tradition, so it's very practical, and it links this information that comes from astronomical observation, and that geometry is built physically on the land and is then connected to specific points of energy that well up through the land, like vortexes. And when the information from the planets is connected with that of the land, then those two sources come together and creates a living space. And it's something quite palpable. The energy can be felt. We can create basically like a force field of energy around the space to protect it in ceremony. You know, as many of your listeners would know, when you're doing medicine and when you're involved in healing, the energy body and the astral body is very open, so we can be quite open and need protection. So that's one of the purposes. The other purpose is that a real sacred space, utilizing this sacred geometry of place, is able to create a center point that the ecosystem around recognizes as being alive. So it creates a new point of vitality that, for example, trees recognize as being alive, and they connect to it. So essentially what happens then is you're able to create authentic bioarchitecture, because that space then becomes part of the energetic or etheric energy systems. You know, in the same way that we have an aura around the body, so do all life forms, plants and trees and animals. When we have plants in the landscape, trees, especially because they're the largest form of the landscape as the dominant energy field, when they recognize a new energy form that's compatible, because that information comes from the energy of the sun and the moon and the earth itself, it's recognized and accepted. And so that space is then becomes part of the ecosystem, part of that energetic environment. And once that happens, we then get spaces that really can benefit life. So, you know, we build them around gardens and things grow better. We give them to plants. We put them in bedrooms and we can sleep better. Essentially, it's life positive. And so we can then utilize this in new architecture, put it around existing buildings, and wellness is maximized, and health is protected from other negative effects that can exist, which is called geopathic stress, which is the effect of the intersection of powerful lines that can affect us at many levels.
And is that sick building syndrome?
Sick building syndrome is a larger aspect. that principle it's part of that principle. Essentially, it's all the frequencies that we live within that overload our energy field. And so the ones I was talking about were from the landscape, for example, the interaction of electromagnetic grids that the Earth naturally produces. But then a large component of sick building syndrome can then be electromagnetic stress, the effect of multiple fields, mobile phones, Wi-Fi, cell towers, and electrical wiring that are not conducive to life. So they're extremely fast frequencies that our body has to adjust to. And so when we're in any sort of built space where these frequencies are maximized, then combined with the earth fields, and then combined with poor ventilation, poor lighting, the emissions from toxic paints and other sources. For example, if the ground that's been built on is not great and can then be emitting radon gas, all these things together is what makes a sick building and which makes us sick as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, it sounds fascinating, but yeah, I mean, moving on from sick buildings, you're creating well buildings and well spaces, and you use the term harmonic space, right? And what you were saying just then, that the science, the engineering, the architecture, what do we call it? What do we call it? Architecture, engineering, the sacred architecture that you implement, brings the man-made structure into line with the energies of the natural world around it. And lots of famous historical buildings have been built with these principles, right? What are some obvious ones, just in case I wrong ones?
Well, we go for the big one. We go for the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Parthenon, a lot of the old cathedrals, a lot of the buildings of the ancient world. They were all built with these principles. And behind the principles of order that we know from that the Greeks pioneered in terms of proportion, that relates to the harmonic knowledge of Pythagoras. So we all remember from school, the Pythagorean theorem, but also the recognition of music. So they were the first to quantify and recognize musical notes. But that proportioning system, where musical notes, when you half it and then double it, so if you half it, you change the pitch, but the music note stays the same. We have guitar, and then we put our thumb halfway along the string, we get a high pitched note. And we double it, and then we get a lower pitch. That same system was then applied to architecture, and that proportioning system relates to things like the golden mean and the human body and form. The system that I utilize is essentially an inner method. Essentially, it was a secret method which took that knowledge one step further, and we were able to create harmonics and frequencies. So a harmonic basically is a mirroring of that primary note, halving, doubling, and you can go on to infinity. So you can maintain that frequency. This system is able to create those notes from the relationship of the sun and the moon and a specific place on Earth. So the best way to describe it is like when we create this, we look at the way that the sun would move around a singular place, and then from this geometry we then create a mandala, which is a drawing, circles and squares, and this then generates these frequencies, and these are location-specific frequencies. So it's a geometric methodology that creates music specific to the place, rather than just utilizing the fundamental laws of harmonics. It's an advanced technology that was then utilized, and then when you use this in combination with the understanding of specific power places, then you can create very, very powerful places. Like, for example, A very classic example is Chartres Cathedral in France, which has many energy lines. It's like a power station of underground energies. It's an old Druid site on a hill, and there's a cathedral that was put there. And the cathedral was built there utilizing this exact system. And the combination of that structure built to these harmonic proportions and that energy then gives that building a lot of power and its sacredness. And essentially it's the combination of those things. And those dimensions are specific to the place, but they also then relate to the formative sacred geometry of the universe. That's the other aspect, is that you're making a building that is in resonance. It resonates fundamentally with the movements of the planets, and then the building can then be linked to star systems and linked to planets and constellations. So you then build your sacred building, and you then want to use that for people to connect to higher powers. So the fundamental principle was to connect heaven with earth. And so all traditions, whether it's Aztec, Mayan, Greek, Roman, Egyptians, they all utilize the same principle. Sometimes use variations of this methodology to create these places. So whether you go to Chichen Itza or to Giza, or you go to Chartres, they're all using the same principles to create places of connection. And now we're in a new era where those religions are no longer with us, or they've lost their importance. We now, science and technology is the new religion. But now what's happened is these places are still relevant. And so the old science, the old ways are still there. And now people are starting to recognize. And so in terms of the new movement of deep ecology, rewilding, regenerative communities, this old science then becomes more relevant, because it then allows us to build regenerative communities and then build new spaces that can respond to climate change and all the challenges we're looking at in terms of agriculture and world change and the food and soil changes. The fact that people are now recognizing that working with the planet is what we have to do, and so this is where the old ways, the old sciences and the harmonic science can really give us tools that can enhance the future and the way that we live on the planet.
Incredible. Right, loads of questions. First one is, are there any sort of contemporary buildings underway using sacred geometry, or new buildings or projects or anything like that you know?
I don't know of any at the moment. There are people utilizing sacred geometry, but it's only but there are none using my system of geometry. It's right. Essentially it's only really been in the public domain for the last 40, 50 years, because before that it was secret, because the Catholic Church didn't want anyone to know about it. We've had to go through a period of reconstruction of the knowledge. I mean, probably the last building that was in Europe that was built in this way was Gaudi. So the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona was built by Gaudi. He was initiated in the tradition, so he was quite unique. So this would probably be the premium location where you see a piece of spectacular modernist architecture, but he utilized this system. So, the last great cathedral, the last great edifice, globally utilizing the exact system. And it's like being inside of a set of aliens. It's spectacular, but he understood the old ways.
So so it doesn't have to, the building in question doesn't have to look like a pyramid. It doesn't have to look like a cathedral. How do you spec it out? So to get the harmony, to tap into the energies, it's about measurements and placement, and then there are some other techniques you use as well, right? But mostly it's about where the building goes specifically, and you're very specific about that, and then the dimensions of it, right?
Correct. You can, we can apply it to new buildings. I'm working on a building at the moment in the mountains outside of Granada, working with a architect, and the building itself can look like anything you want to look like, and then the harmonic elements are dimensions. You're right. So the frequencies, the music, is manifested within dimensions, and
The music
that
of
could be
nature, as it were. Yeah.
correct.
Sorry,
Correct. So essentially, what we're building is we're actually building with the music, the frequencies that are inherent within the landscape, and then the system allows us to tap into those, select them, and then combine them in the same way that a herbalist might combine herbs to create a specialist, a bespoke solution for you. And so they're combined in that way. So herbalists would combine them to let's say to tonify the heart, would understand that the liver and the kidneys also need working together. So he then utilized different herbs to have that overall effect. So so a Chinese herbalist will then be creating a specific solution for you rather than a pharmaceutical, which is a generic solution. The way I work is I combine musical notes in dimensions in exactly the same way, and then together the different combinations of musical notes and elements are compositions that have different effects in three-dimensional space, and that's created by the use of geometry, and that geometry is applied to the earth or within the buildings, either within a new building, or we can apply it externally, and that can be if, for example, we are building a stone circle around the earth, and that the geometry of that circle is activated by the weight of the stones in the same way. So it's a building art. So it's applying that music through the structure. In this case, it's stones around a yurt. Equally, it could be a new house, and the geometry is inherent within the foundation. Both ways work. Essentially, you're installing the information of that relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth, in the same way that you'd install a program into a computer, but the installation process is three-dimensional and is applied to the land. And when that geometry is applied to the land, it's there. If you put a building in place, it's there essentially until the building falls down. That information is essentially played by its installation to the land, and that music will resonate. So those musical notes will resonate through the geometry in perpetuity in that place.
So, I mean, you mentioned music and tones. Is this what I remember? Is this anything to do with like tuning? Not that I know anything about that.
Yeah, it is. It is the way that it's actually very, very exactly that. In the cathedrals that were the epitome of this tradition, where the art was perfected, they would go to such points where they would the master builders would select the musical notes that they wanted the space to resonate with, and then would pack sandbags at certain heights to adjust the resonance of the stone, because if you take a stone and you hit it, it will ring. Certain stones will ring like a bell. The intention was for the architecture to ring like a bell, and it could be tunes, and they would place sandbags at specific locations within the architecture, and then hit the stones, and then listen for the reverberations, and then adjust the sandbags to feel that. And so it is a tuning process. So that actually did happen. And now what we're doing is that when we use the musical notes, we can actually use that structure to tune the landscape. So I'll go back to the workshop we will be doing. We'll be placing a stone circle of 22 stones. Those stones are in resonance and are created by a particular geometry of the land itself. And those stones will instigate a musical frequency that will bring balance to a wider landscape. but specifically to that ear, and it will then tune the space. It will actually install those musical notes, and it's not audible. It can be felt at the center. It can be felt, but it's also recognized at a much subtler level. It's recognized at the level of the energy body.
It's reminding me of sort of bioenergetics and sort of human energy fields. Is there a connection there or a parallel?
Yeah, absolutely. The human energy field is made up of many layers of frequencies and many layers of electromagnetic and etheric, which just means subtle energy fields. And those fields, you know, we exist within them, but those fields also exist within all built spaces as the result of the different electromagnetic fields that the Earth just creates. There is, you know, wherever you're sitting now, or your listeners are sitting, they're going to be above a watercourse. That watercourse will create an electromagnetic field, and those fields, and they all interpenetrate, and also then interpenetrate and are connected with the fields created by the electrical wiring and the other aspects. So even a normal home will have its own field, will have its own energy field, that in the same way that if we don't look after ourselves, our energy field can then become fatigued. And let's say we are eating really badly, you know, we're sitting within a lot of Wi-Fi fields, a lot of electronics, or we've got a lot of fear, and all the other factors that can affect our wellness has an effect in the field. I use a system called GGV BioWell camera, and it's an electromagnetic system which allows me to measure the biofield of a person, and it gives me a readout. So it's an advancement of the Carillion system from the 60s, which everyone would have seen those old photos of the auras around people, and they were really low quality. This is now the new advancement. It allows us to see and recognize where there are holes within our energy field, and the correlation to the meridian system or organ systems. And so if we then go for healing a modality, or we change our diet, you can then track the changes in the field. It's the same with spaces as well. So that if we're living within a space that is really unhealthy, our energy field is going to be affected, and our health is going to be affected in the same way that our physical body, if it's living or existing within an unhealthy aura or biofield, is also then going to suffer from it. The two interact exactly.
Right. Fascinating. So I want to get on to all the stuff that you kind of offer and talk about your workshop on the 8th of May as well. But first, I mean, you trained for 10 years, and you're the only person in Britain right now that can do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, how about sort of worldwide, and how did you find the teacher? Did you have to impress them by turning up randomly at their door and refusing to go away, even though they kept shutting it in your face?
Almost, yeah. Almost, yeah. I became aware after this journey I went through, and I just was led to the work, and I spent about 3 years researching, and then I saw something my teacher had written, and he has no website, never has, and I did that classic sort of old kung fu film of trying to find the teacher, and after about a year I found him, and then he was in France, and we did it online with no video, and it was a bit of a disaster. And then I did actually have that where there was a point where I stopped training, and then he just basically just went, right, I'm done with you, and I just sort of grovel to come back. And then I sort of finally got back onto it. It's quite a tough thing, because there's a lot of geometry and a lot of mathematics, and it's quite counterintuitive to the whole new age thing, which is everything's intuitive and felt in the sort of the way that Reiki is, and everything's about the energy field, where this is the authentic desired way of creating energy effects through mathematics. So it takes a lot to drop into, and the professional training is about 3 years. I was running workshops for several years, and there was no one who wanted to take it fully. So I had to go to America to train for 3 years. Hence why there is no one else who's done the training. And also the tradition only exists in France. Historically, it's a combination of the ancient understanding the land of the Celtic peoples, plus the influx of the knowledge of temple building that came into Europe at the time of the Crusades. So the understanding of the Arabic arch, which instigated the Gothic and allowed them to start to build cathedrals, and then plus the correlation with the Vedic system of music harmonics. So there's a number of different traditions that only existed in France. So it never existed in the UK, for example. Hence why there's no one teaching it here. And this knowledge was closely guarded and was kept within certain traditions, and those traditions kept their knowledge secret. It was what gave them their commercial viability. And when they stopped building churches around about the end of the 19th century, they had no more work, and then it was almost in decline, and then it was reformed from the 60s onwards. Hence why there's, and it was only in France, and it's now been taught for about the last 10 years. There's not many people doing it, no, but I'm now teaching and going to over the next couple of years start to offer introductions to it. One of the problems we find is that the people who are interested are really to do with energy and or if they want to know how to develop their spaces, their understanding or exposure to this work usually is through feng shui, which is a very powerful system, but the high level teachings aren't really available. And with our system, there's a lot of math and geometry, and people don't quite register that to begin with, and so it's necessary to really get to that. So a lot of the people who are really energy sensitive can find a problem with that. So it's a very interesting balance between the scientific and the energetic.
Absolutely. And you figured out a few more of those balances in terms of specific services that you offer that appeal to contemporary lifestyles. There's the harmonic space, whether that's from the foundations up, or whether it's coming in and, I hesitate to say pimping or remixing, but what is there a particular word that you use for wellness?
Well, harmonic space is the bespoke design, and that can work with from a new building or working with the existing building, So that's
and you can do it for bedrooms and sleep, right?
No, we can do it for everything. It moves the geometry is scalable from jewelry up to the size of a city because of this law of octaves. So it can work equally on a whole building, a bedroom, an actual bed, piece of furniture, or an interiors, or even a landscape. So for gardens, we worked on syntropic and permaculture spaces. So it can be applied to areas where there's planting for animals, for bees. So it's applicable to all scales. I have an area which is to do with sleep. So sleep is very important for us because we spend 8 hours there, and it's about creating sleep spaces that are protected. And we have a very specific way of designing a bed with the geometry, so you get to sleep within the music of the land. There's a grouping of the work called Shala, which I've created specifically for the wellness industry, and that's a series of processes that begins with the clearing and protection of the space to make it safe. and then a series of dedicated structures that can be built to layer up with for retreat centers and meditation spaces, specifically using plants and plant biofields, so to make spaces that we can sit within, so meditation spaces and meditation gardens, and we sit within circles of plants. It feels like a float tank. We have something which works on the chakra system, so we locate specific points and you move through them, and it opens and balances the chakra system, a place to ground after meditation, and also one which is more to do with landscape structures. So that's called mandala. So that can be labyrinths, stone circles, which we talked about, medicine wheels. And these structures have been used by all traditional cultures as places of healing, places of to balance the land, places for ceremony, and also places for the advancement of crops. There's an amazing piece of research that was done about 20 years ago, where some of the flat-topped pyramids in South America were measured, and they recognized that farmers would come and place their seeds on the top of the pyramids above above magnetic anomalies and specific configurations of fields, and the seeds would germinate much faster within those fields, and that would then utilizing that technology, utilizing the space, would then give greater harvests. And so I'm sort of looking at the moment, and also, as I said, for bees, we can protect animals as well. So the work has traditionally been applied on all of those areas. I have an online program called Sanctuary, which allows people to build a meditation space in their home online, and the Earth Wisdom program, which is the teaching program, which is day workshops, and then I'm going to start to be offering longer programs on the geometry as people start to work through it. That also includes dowsing and feeling the landscape and nature meditation, which supports getting into the right frame of mind and the right frequency to allow us to feel this stuff. So and then those alone has huge impacts on wellness, and those techniques are used by all traditional cultures that lived on the land.
I was about to ask a facetious question, which is, can you make a website with sacred geometry? Can you make a digital space? Can you make a virtual space?
I've not been asked that before. It's interesting. You can. There's the sacred geometry. I mean, there is now a huge interest in sacred geometry. It's amazing. It's taken about 20 years to get there, but now it's really taking off. The flower of life is now everywhere, and it's there is a deep science behind it, and we do learn this and teach this. Essentially, the geometric forms are sound frequencies converted into geometry and to do with number, and this is all connected. It's a very, very deep science. And so when these forms are out there, for example, the flower of life, that is a sacred geometry symbol that's now everywhere. So the more people are using it, it has more power through its geometry. My system is about building, and the power comes from its location, in the same way that in mythologies, a god's power would come from the more people that prayed to that god. It really took its power from the intention and the correspondence between that aspect of the godhead and the people praying, which is all that the secret and all those things. It's how much we can connect to that field. There are certain geometries that can be utilized irrespective of location, and those could be used digitally, and then that geometry and those dimensions could then be used with symbols, and you could then get some effect from on screen, but I've not done that yet. Interesting question.
But yeah, I mean, there's so your website is on the way at the time of recording. And
it's on the way.
he plastered
It
all
is
over the captions, etc., for this when I get it up.
It will be markleib.com. It is coming.
And that's MARKLEIB.
That is correct.
Right?
That is correct.
But people can find you on Instagram for now.
Mark Leib _ biodesign on Instagram, yes.
And that's definitely worth looking at for the pictures of you meditating inside a dolmen and other very on-brand things for a geomancer and a biodesigner. So let's quick recap of where people can get tickets for the workshop, May the 8th, just outside Glastonbury, where you guys are building a sacred space that could be used, for example, for plant medicine ceremonies.
Correct. And I'm going to tell you that is to reserve a place for that. It's Gibby 74. That's GIBBY 74 at sky.com. And Gibby is managing the bookings for that workshop.
That's about as hidden science as one can get these days, isn't it? So, dude, thank you ever so much for taking the time to talk to me. Is there anything you're desperate to put across that you haven't yet?
Not really. I've probably talked too much.
You've spoken very eloquently indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I think that I think probably the most important thing for people to recognise is that there's an awful lot of invisible layers out there, and now as people are investigating and plant medicine and other aspects of healing are now starting to become overground. When you go and do that work, you're working with the spirits of those plants, and part of my tradition's work was to recognize that there were spirits in the land. So as much as there is a mathematical system, it's like the science, a horoscope links us to the universe, and and why does the correspondences of our birth be important, because it links us to those planets. It's also important to recognize that we are linked to the land and to the earth, and those spirits that can heal us within the plants also exist at a planetary level, and this is one of the great things that has been lost, and I think now is vital as we come into this new era, that we need to recognize that the land and the planet itself is able to help us in the same way that a particular plant can from the Amazon, or whether it's from a field near us. They all have spirit. They all have a great value to support our wellness.
Bang on. Cheers again. Mark Leib, Mark with a K, Mark Leib, LEIB _ biodesign on Instagram. That's where people want to go. In the meantime as well, they should head over to newpsychonaut.com for psychedelic culture and discovery. I've been Stephen Langsford-Beale. That's Mark Leib. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for listening.